Time for another video, and before we get started, a big thank you and shout out once again to everyone who has liked and subscribed so far. Seems like the spaced repetition video I posted resonated with a lot of you, and that's really cool to see. I hope you give it a go and see how you find it, and can mould and reshape it to work for you personally. I've read all of the comments and tried to answer a bunch of your questions there, but I wanted to make this second part of the video to discuss some of the pitfalls to avoid when trying this learning method, the drawbacks of this Anki method, and best practices. As such, some of what is in this video likely won't make any sense to you unless you watch part 1, which should be available to watch on your screens about now. So if you haven't seen that yet, I recommend viewing it first. That would at least bring you up to speed with what spaced repetition learning is and what Anki is as a program. The concepts we will be covering today include scanning, which is literally scanning a physical copy of a book to make a digital copy, capturing, which is taking a scanned or otherwise digital book and making it into Anki flashcards, chunking, which is breaking a big idea or concept into smaller, more manageable pieces which are easier to isolate and learn, prepping, which is creating challenges for your Anki cards, circulation, which is bringing new cards into the schedule for study, and rescheduling, which is preventing backlogs of cards from building up by spreading the load across your work week. Before that though, the most requested thing was which books am I using to make the cards from? The basic list can be seen on screen now, and these are the ones I currently work from. I do have more, and I will make my next video entirely dedicated to breaking down why I use books, as well as why I chose these books specifically, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime though, another question was how do I scan the books, and more on how I make the cards, so I've gone out and acquired this new book that I've had my eye on for a while. It's called The Beginner's Guide to Creating Portraits by 3D Total, and the reason I've chosen this over any other portrait book on the market is that they all tend to focus on oils specifically, which I've never used, and this one seems more about digital art. Most importantly, however, the principles it contains are demonstrated in a way that can really be applied to any medium, so I would consider this a good book for that reason. The easiest way to get a book into Anki is to simply grab it for Kindle or your preferred e-reader, but this book is sadly not available digitally, and so before we can turn it into Anki cards, we have to scan it. Fair warning, this entire process is tedious, so bear that in mind if you want to try it yourself. I have this as my book scanner, a Caesar Aura Pro. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, so this isn't a sponsored review or anything like that. It was actually fairly expensive when I bought it. I think it cost around £300 when I got it a few years ago, but that's still cheap compared to the majority of book scanners on the market. You can use a regular desktop scanner to scan books, but it's way slower. I've scanned not just art books using this device, but books on other subjects too for my experiments, so I personally consider it a worthwhile investment, and I use it often. If you can't afford a book scanner, I would recommend seeing if your school, college or library has one that you can get access to, and of course if you can find a digital copy of the book you want, then you can skip this step entirely. Finally, a quick reminder to please scan responsibly. As mentioned in the previous video, I do not publish these book scans online, as I believe the artists who create them should profit from their efforts via book sales, so please don't engage in piracy and rob someone of their livelihood. Most books can be purchased very cheaply as used copies, or even borrowed from a library or a friend. Scanning is a pain, but it only needs to be done once. It's a case of turning the pages and pushing this little button here on the scanner to scan each spread, and then the software of the scanner app corrects the curvature of the pages to make everything flat and readable. It also removes your fingers if you use the provided finger cots, which is pretty cool. I scanned the entire book in one sitting and it took me 45 minutes. Of all those pages, only one scanned incorrectly, which I quickly rescanned. Scanner sometimes has problems picking up certain pages with very dark areas, but it's fairly rare, and as long as you're vigilant, you should be good. You do have to watch the lighting conditions when doing this as well, as some glossier finished book pages tend to reflect the overhead lights and blow out in the scans, leaving white hotspots on the page and the text unreadable. So I ensure the scans are coming out well as I work. It's also why I'm sat on the floor here under natural light on an overcast day. Once scanned, we can check the book for any issues or pages that need rescanning. From there, we can export the book as a PDF and save it somewhere safe. I also back it up to an external hard drive because I'm not going through the hassle of scanning it again. We can then delete the files that are saved here on the right hand side of the Caesar app and close the program. We are done scanning. Before we go about adding a book into Anki as a deck, let's briefly go over what Anki looks like and the very basics of how it works. We have several buttons at the top here. The decks page features all of your decks, and it's where you'll spend your time studying. By clicking on a deck, you can study any cards due today as denoted by the numbers next to the deck title. We can click the little cog here next to a deck, and this is where we set how many new cards to allow a day and how many cards to review a day via the options menu. Blue numbers indicate how many new cards will be shown that day, and this is how we circulate new cards into study, but we're going to cover that separately in a while. I focus on the green number here, which is how many reviews I have today. A red number is used to denote a card up for immediate restudy, because you couldn't remember it. This is more of a declarative learning thing, so you won't often use it for studying painting. It just means this card will be shown more frequently because you need to burn up on it. You can also create subdecks inside decks, which is how I organise my decks via subject. The Add button adds a card to whatever deck or subdeck we've clicked on. We will be using this in a minute to create our new deck of cards. Browse can look a bit overwhelming at first. This is where we can view all the cards inside a deck we click on. This is where we can also edit or add any information to a card, and it will be how we prep our decks, which we will be covering later in the video. Right-clicking any card also brings up a bunch of options for it, which we will examine more closely in a while. Stats brings up your weekly schedule, and you can see in the bar chart how many cards you have due for this deck. To view the cards due across all of your decks, you can change this button at the top from Deck to Collection to see the total amount due. By clicking on any bar in the chart, you can see which specific cards are due that day. This will be important later in the video when we look at dealing with backlogs. Finally, Sync just syncs your data to the Anki server. Anki can hold a bunch of data, such as images and even videos, making it a very powerful learning tool. You can also use the File menu here to export all of your decks as a small packed file and save it somewhere safe in case the server or your computer ever fails, which I recommend. Now we can create a new deck, which is done by simply clicking this Add button. This page will add new cards to the current deck, but we want to make a new deck, and so we hit this button in the upper right and you can see all the decks shown in this list. I have all my art decks as subdecks under a parent deck called Painting and Drawing. I use the following syntax to make the subdeck appear under this parent Painting and Drawing deck. Note the double colons. This makes it very easy for me to manage the scheduling per deck, which we will get to in a while, and it just helps with general organisation. I can now start the process of screen capturing the book scanned PDF to make the cards. This is also tedious, and I might spread this out over a few evenings or a weekend. I just write the page title at the top of the page on the front of the card. Then I screen cap the pages using the Windows shortcut Control plus the S key plus the Windows key. This brings up the snip tool, so I can capture the page and place the copied image onto the back of the card. Some pages in certain books are a pain to capture because the layout of the book might cover multiple ideas in one page, the text and images might be all over the place, and so sometimes I have to scan the text and photos separately and sort of create my own page layout on the back of the card. Some of the pages in this book cover a tutorial, which spans multiple pages. I tend to break these up into multiple cards, chunking the tutorial up into steps that I can use to recreate the tutorial in stages. The main thing to consider when capturing cards like this is that you want to chop the book up into small enough parts that you will be able to study it. This concept is often referred to in meta-learning as chunking, and how big your chunks are is personal to you, so it will take some trial and error. I've broken this lengthy tutorial down into two logical phases, the drawing and the painting. I prefer quite small chunks, to be honest, and so if I discover that this card is now too long when I eventually get around to working on it, I may recapture it or break it up into even smaller chunks. In general, I try to make each card capture an isolated aspect that the book is trying to teach, so I can practice it purely and dedicate all of my focus to it for that study session. There is definitely some trial and error for this stage, so if you find a card is actually too long or too finely chopped up to be useful to you, you can always edit cards or delete them and redo them. It's a pain having to redo things, but if it will end up with you having a better learning experience, try to remember that it's just a little effort up front in exchange for a lifetime of learning. You could always read a section of the book or tutorial before capturing it to better gauge how to break the material down into suitably sized Anki cards if you prefer. There are also pages or parts of the book that you might feel are totally irrelevant to you, and so you can just skip these. These would be things like the index or contents pages. Sometimes when you scan lots of books in, Anki complains that the information on the front of the card is not unique and asks you to change it. If I already have a card somewhere titled Introduction, for example, Anki complains. I get around this by just using the abbreviated book name in parentheses next to the word Introduction, like so. The total time to capture this book was around 90 minutes, and I spread it across 2 sessions. Now we have the book scanned, we can prep it. This takes the longest to do, but this is where we'll be actually reading the book and considering how we might create a procedural challenge for each idea, and cherry-picking the important declarative parts to help us learn them. I don't always prep a whole book at once. In fact, I tend to only do the first chapter of a book unless there's something specific I know I will want to bring into circulation soon, or it's a book I consider to be very useful, like How to Draw by Scott Robertson. This is because the rate of cycling in new cards can be slow, so I tend to work in batches of what I intend to study in the near future and only prep things that will be included in that batch. This is just effective time management. That being said, books can sometimes be written to follow a logical order, so I tend to now prep my books in the order the author has written it in. See, if I jump in too far and start reading and prepping something from the middle of the book, there's a chance I won't understand some core concept from earlier in the book, so watch out for that if you're cherry-picking subjects to introduce to your study schedule. To show you how this works, let's make a card together. I click on the deck, which now contains the entire book broken up into chunked cards. I hit Browse, and now you can see a list of all the cards, in the order they appeared in the book. If I click a card from this list on the left side, I can view the card on the right side. I will now read the cards and work out what information in them I want to set as my prompts and challenges. Some cards, like this one for the foreword of the book, don't really contain any information I consider worthy of wanting to internalise, but it does still make for pleasant reading. It contains some interesting philosophical thoughts about why we're so captivated by faces in art, and it forms a backbone to better prepare me for what the later cards in the book will be about. So I tend to just cycle these cards in to skim through, and treat them as very easy when I decide when they should appear next. They won't appear often once circulated. Some of the cards I prep are purely declarative, which means I won't write a challenge for them. This card is about perceptual portraiture, so a good prompt for it might be, what is perceptual portraiture? For those curious, it's just trying to render what you see, by the way. It then goes on to mention that you can create portraits from life, which is preferred generally, or from photographs, and that each has their own merits and limitations. I'll write a couple of prompts to get me thinking about these points. The first time I see this card as a new card, I won't know the answers to these questions, so I'll read the card, and then the next time I see it, I should be able to recall some of these points. At the very least, it gets me thinking about them. I treat cards like this as easy as well, because they don't really teach me anything vital to learning art, but they're interesting things to consider, and to remember when choosing reference material, for example. To show a card which needs declarative prompts and a procedural challenge, I've skipped ahead a few cards to this one. It's all about comparative measurement. This part of the book, now a card, is entirely dedicated to explaining the different ways to measure the head while drawing, all condensed down to a single card. It covers span measurement, or dividing a line to work out if, say, the forehead is taller than the chin. It also talks about box measurement, which it says is the most accurate way to measure a head, as well as using calipers. I write declarative prompts for all of these so that when I see this card, I'll be able to quickly remind myself of all of them. I might have a favourite measuring method that I use all the time, but decide I want to experiment with one I never use for this card. The challenge for this card has to make us practice this skill to begin mastery of it, and so, quite simply, I've set it to find some reference and draw heads using these methods. As I study with this card over time, I'll be getting lots of good practice in, but also finding the method which I personally resonate with the most. I might treat this card as hard when I first bring it into circulation, but from experience I know that this is such a simple concept that I should be quite good at it quite quickly, say within 3 hours of study time, and from that point I can treat it as easier and review it less often. Besides which, all the other portraiture cards in this book will require the use of it, and so I'll be used often regardless of whether I study it or not. This card just offers me a way to intermittently review it, and experiment with it, and ensure that I do truly understand it. Some cards might not have a declarative aspect at all, and just have a challenge, but I try to always include something declarative just to fire my brain up before starting the challenge. Remember, internalization is all about recalling information you haven't used for a while, and so this will help you with that. Also, while that card on proportions featured an obvious challenge that we could use, not all cards will be as obvious, and so you might have to really think about what a card is asking you to study and create your own challenge based around that. Like most of this, it's going to be personal to you and a case of trial and error. You can always rework a card's prompts or challenges down the road, nothing is ever set in stone. Remember, this is all just a way of journaling your findings as you go. Change is inevitable as you grow as an artist, and your cards will grow with you. Okay, this is where things will get a little bit more complex, and so we need to slow down a little bit, because if you're a regular user of Anki, what I'm going to do is set up the scheduler to not allow any new cards to be added per day, unless I tell it that it's okay. And this is not normal for most Anki users. The reason for this is, as many who watched the last video pointed out, is that you can very quickly develop a backlog under regular circumstances using this method. What is a backlog? Well, in short, everything you cycle in as a new card is being placed in a queue for you to review in the future. If you get a bit overzealous and add a new card to study every day, then you can end up with days that have dozens of cards scheduled. You cannot get through them all in one day, and so you leave some until the next day, and before you know it, you have a huge backlog of cards to get through and cannot learn anything new. Anki recently updated to version 3 of its scheduler, and it now advises you on what numbers to set for new and review cards per day. But as it's designed for declarative learning, and we are effectively hacking it for procedural learning, we need to take these numbers it suggests with a pinch of salt. Backlogs can also occur if life gets in the way, and you might have to skip training for a few days. You might come back to Anki after a week's holiday and have 30 cards to study. Backlogs can lead to people feeling frustrated and unmotivated. Prevention is the best cure, and so to prevent a backlog happening in the first place, we're going to prevent Anki from ever adding new cards to study unless we tell it it's okay. To do this, simply click the little cog here to the right of any deck and hit Options. You're taken to a screen where you can manage the daily card limits for this deck or globally for all of your decks. I set the global daily limit for new cards to 0. This means that I now totally control the flow of new cards, and on days where I decide that a new card is allowed to be added, I will add one new card. But there is one annoying problem with this now. As I said, Anki very recently updated to version 3. And so since I made the first part of this video, I've actually had to change the way I circulate new cards in. Before this update, this was really simple and easy to manage. You just hit this custom study button down here after clicking on a deck and set new cards to 1. This allowed you to study one new card that day only for whatever deck you wanted. This should cause a little blue number 1 to appear next to the deck, indicating a new card is ready to be learnt, but annoyingly, as of the update, it doesn't seem to work. I'm still getting my head around why this is, but I think it's related to how many cards you have reviewed for the day or how many you have scheduled for upcoming days. My current workaround is to head back over to the deck options here via the little cog and try and set the today only value for this deck's new card limit to 1. The problem is that doesn't always work either. To get around this, if you want to study a new card today and Anki just doesn't seem to allow it, set the global limit to 1 and save. Now, every deck will allow for one new card to be studied, so study from the deck you want, then go back to the global limit and set it back to 0. It's a pain and way more complicated than it was just a few weeks ago, but the developers of Anki roll out updates fairly frequently, and so maybe this will be something they make easier again in the future. The next question is, given all this business about backlogs, how often should we circulate new material, and how do we know when it's safe to do so? Well, because everything you bring in for study gets added to a queue, there will be random days where you end up with a bunch of cards to study, and little mini backlogs form. My solution to managing this is to simply spread these cards out by looking ahead and editing the workload for the next 7 days, which I tend to do on Sunday nights. If you head over to the stats page, you'll see that we have that neat bar chart showing us how many cards we have to study in the future. If we click on a bar, we can see the cards scheduled for that day. For example, in 4 days' time, on Thursday, I have 2 cards that I could easily spend an hour each on. Both are anatomy based, so I could decide to spend 30 minutes on each. However, on Wednesday, in 3 days' time, I have just a single declarative card to study, which will only take me a few minutes to read, and then I'm done for the day. So what I will do here is bring one of the cards from Thursday to Wednesday. I do this by right-clicking the card I want to change and using this Set Due Date option. I change the number to 3 to reschedule this card to appear in 3 days' time. I have to close and reopen the stats window to see these changes take effect, but I have now spread the load out for the week ahead to make it more manageable. If I spot a day with a bunch of cards, I'll move some of the cards to a day with less cards. This means I can control the backlog, spread it out across quieter days, or even shift a card off into the future to a day with no cards in very extreme situations. Some cards like these ones I have scheduled are declarative and they involve no challenge, so I don't mind these appearing on the same day. They only take a few minutes to do, so I could probably manage dozens a day quite easily, so these ones aren't an issue. Some of the cards I've been studying for a long time that I used to spend an hour on are now super easy for me to do. Cards like this one about mirroring planes, for example. I won't spend 1 hour drawing these mirrored planes because, not to brag, I now find it incredibly easy, even with no grids or perspective lines. When I first started, I had to draw guides and really think about it, but it's become a reflex now, like Ronaldo dribbling a football. As such, I tend to treat these cards as a 10 to 15 minute warm-up, and then study my main 1 hour card for the day. That's why some days I have allowed more than one card to build up here. The general idea when doing this is to try and never let these backlogs appear by being preventative, but if you do ever get one, now you know how to deal with it. If I see a day that has a free slot or a low workload coming up, and I really have nothing I can spread to that day, then I can bring in a new card. However, I tend to circulate a new card on the day before I want to study it. Let's say Tuesday is the day with the low workload. Because hitting the hard button will make whatever card I bring in as new reappear the next day, if I bring in a card at the end of training on Monday, I can read it and hit hard and then study it for the first time properly on Tuesday when I have time. So on Monday I read it to prepare myself for tomorrow's training. I can then click the button to get the card to reappear tomorrow, and the card will be studied then. Bear in mind when you do this that new cards will reappear every few days, so even a single new card can quickly stack up on your schedule. As such, I tend to only bring in new cards when I can see the workload for the coming week is fairly light. The key thing to take away from this, because I can appreciate that it may seem quite mind-boggling, is to learn how Anki works, learn what sort of workload you can manage, and then control the flow of cards to suit you. It takes some trial and error, and some people will not enjoy working like this, so you might not want to use this system. Anki is not really designed for this sort of work, and so we're using it in a somewhat hacky way to make it work for us. Until a plugin or a better program comes along, we have to make do. There are other spaced repetition learning softwares on the market, and so you might prefer to try and set this method up with one of those. If this method really rubs you the wrong way, you might want to try a watered down variation, where you just avoid Anki entirely and use a calendar or diary to create your own study schedule. I'll show some alternate systems of study in future videos. The main reason I like Anki, as mentioned in the previous video, is that I can note-take directly onto the cards themselves, and so my understanding of a topic grows with me. Therefore, I like to think of Anki as a digital journal that I can use to take notes on isolated aspects of my education, those chunks that I mentioned earlier. I can scroll through my library of art cards, find something I feel like my work sorely needs to improve, and bring it into circulation as a new topic. I can make notes on it, plan future experiments around it, and everything is stored and scheduled for me to look at again in the near future. What cards you circulate as new are entirely up to you, but my advice would be to target areas you feel you are weak in and study those things first. Let's look at an issue that can sometimes crop up when you bring a new card into circulation. Anki knows which card to bring in next because each card has a unique ID number, as seen in the Browse page. We can set the card list to be displayed in the order the cards were added, which should correspond to the page order of the book you scanned in, making it very easy to work through a book in order. However, this can sometimes get a bit muddled up, and Anki might show you a card you do not want to study now. Also, the opposite, you might not want to progress through the book chronologically, and instead cherry pick cards to study from further in the book. To pick the card you want to study, simply track it down in the Browse list, either manually because you were smart and use unique titles for your cards, or by searching for it in the text field. Right click it, and there's an option called Reposition. If we change this number to 0, then it will put this card on the top of the new stack for the subdeck it is contained within, meaning it will be shown as the next new card for that deck. This allows us to control which new card we want to study today. While I'm here, I'll also show you what to do if you've made a mistake, or want to remove a card from the schedule and take it out of circulation. There is a forget option that will remove it, and you can either reset the card's progress, totally resetting it, or retain the progress for it, but remove it from a schedule until a later date. As you can see, there are some really powerful options here for you to tailor the training however you want. You can flag a card with a colour, if you want to colour code your cards or signify something pertinent to you, perhaps your personal way of taking notes or studying. You can also change the deck a card is in if you added it to the wrong deck by mistake. The little cards/notes toggle up in the upper left here will change the options that are available when you right click a card in the Browse list. The note options are more for things like card types and setting up templates for cards. There are some very powerful options in here too, but I don't really use them apart from for cards for studying language. But I will place some links to documentation in the description for those interested in learning more. Let's say you have a holiday booked, or you feel burnt out and just want to take a break from Anki for a while, but you don't want an epic backlog waiting for you when you return to it. This is very easy to manage. Just head to the Browse page, select every card, and then right click them. You can then toggle on the Suspend option, which will remove the cards from the schedule, and then untoggle it when you return to Anki and pick up where you left off. This never used to reset a card's progress, and as far as I know that is still the case, but as Anki updates regularly I cannot guarantee that behaviour will remain so treat this option with a little bit of care. As mentioned, I wanted to give a fair analysis of my time using this as a study method, which is around 4 years now, and in my last video I mentioned all of the benefits, but I also need to be upfront and honest about where it fails. Firstly, Anki as a program is not designed for this sort of procedural practice. The algorithm the designers use is more for people who want to learn Spanish vocabulary, or the capital cities of countries and things like that. We're sort of trying our best here to hack the scheduler, algorithm and cards to form a digital journal and library rolled into one that lets us study at a pace we dictate. My general approach is to just hit hard on cards I feel I want to emphasize work on, meaning they appear frequently, and then as I get better at them, I use the easier buttons to make them appear less frequently. You will have to experiment with these buttons for yourself. See what works best for you, the way you personally retain information, and develop these skills for yourself. I really like using this program as a training tool, but it's not for everyone. I suggest if you're curious and you want to try it, maybe give it a go for 6 weeks or so, and see what works for you and what doesn't. If this method really doesn't work for you, that's fine. It just means that you resonate with a different method of learning, and you can go about finding something that works better for you personally. The second drawback is that this learning method is slow. I've been doing this for 4 years now, and while I have improved dramatically, I just don't have the time to cycle in new cards often, as I can only usually study for 1 hour a day. This means the rate of circulation is frustratingly slow. I'm the sort of person who sees limitations as a way of enforcing creativity, and so I use this limitation to make me very selective about what new cards I study. When I get a free slot to study a new card, I have to really think carefully about what I need to work on next and try to add the card that will give me the most bang for my buck. I've tried to turn this stumbling block into a stepping stone. You might be in the envious situation of being able to study for 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, and 1 hour in the evening. And so this might not be as much of an issue for you, but your progress will still be pretty slow compared to somebody at, say, art college who could cover the entirety of how to draw within their first 12 weeks at school under a professional art instructor. I personally like studying slow and only progressing when I feel I truly understand a subject, but those of you who learn better by challenging yourselves or devouring new content quickly might find the system very slow and annoying. I'll show other methods in the future that you might prefer instead. Thirdly, just to reiterate the point I made in my last video, although this is spaced repetition learning, there's no scientific proof that what we're doing works for learning art. I have found it's worked for me, and interestingly, some of you who commented on the previous video did say that you do similar things and they work for you. If I had to bet money, I'd say this method does work, and that you really can achieve significant growth in art in just 1 hour a day, and that the science would prove that. However, that means some real neuroscientists need to look at the practice that we're doing here and set up a sample group to test it thoroughly. To my knowledge, nobody's done that yet, and so we wait with bated breath. In the meantime, spaced repetition has been proven to work for things like Spanish vocabulary and learning the capital cities. So to recap, we have looked at how to scan books, how to screen cap digital books and turn them into Anki flashcards, how to prepare these cards to turn them into art lessons that we can practice to improve at specific things, how to bring new cards into circulation despite the slight annoyances that the new scheduler now has, and how to manage the queue of cards so that we can prevent backlogs and train at our own pace, hopefully without becoming burnt out or overwhelmed. Hopefully that makes sense and you now have a little more insight into how Anki works and how I use it. If you have any more questions, please place them in the comments and I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. As mentioned, this whole process is an ongoing experiment for me and I've been doing it long enough that it's fairly easy for me to manage the workload. If you're new to Anki, bear in mind that you will be on a bit of a learning curve for the program at the same time as trying to learn art. Try not to get frustrated. Instead, learn how the program works and err on the side of caution by only adding new cards slowly, at a pace you can manage without becoming frustrated or burnt out. Hopefully as more of you spread the word about this, you'll discover tricks and hacks that I'm unaware of and we can all grow more knowledgeable together. As a quick side note, although I've dedicated this channel to learning how to draw and paint, I have used this method to create digital journals and cards for other subjects as diverse as coding, origami and electronics. I use an identical approach for all of these by finding books that are recommended and then creating a syllabus to study from. While this is all an ongoing experiment, I am pleased with the results so far. Next time we'll be looking at books versus other forms of media and why I feel books are so good. I'll also be providing a more detailed look at the books I use with this art learning method and why I chose them, so I hope you can join me next time.